They tried to put the only man who opened the door for me in a cell tonight.
The rain in Missoula comes sideways in late October, the kind that finds the gap between your collar and your neck and settles there like it has nowhere better to be. It had been raining for 2 days straight when Cole Mercer stood outside the chain-link fence of Donovan Ironworks at 10 minutes past 9 on a Wednesday night, his left shoe soaked through at the toe, $11 in his front pocket, and nowhere on this earth to go. He had asked 9 people before this. A gas station attendant on 4th Street who looked at him and looked away. A woman coming out of a church who told him the shelter on Madison had beds, but it was full and had been full for a week. A man at a diner counter who listened to 3 sentences and then slid a menu between them like a wall. 6 others whose faces had already started to blur together the way faces do when the answer is always the same. No, sorry, cannot help you. Good luck, son. Cole was not the kind of young man who cried easily. He had not cried the night his mother died, not because he was hard, but because he had already used up most of what he had, watching her go slowly over 4 months, and there was nothing left when the actual end came. He had not cried the morning his stepfather, Roy, looked at him across the kitchen table 4 days ago, the morning after Cole turned 20 years old, and said the thing that Roy had probably been saving up for years, waiting for the exact moment when Cole could no longer be worth anything to him financially. He had not cried then either. He was not crying now. He was just standing in the rain outside a garage in Missoula, Montana, looking at the thin yellow light coming from under the bay door, listening to the sound of metal on metal from inside, and trying to decide whether a 10th no was worse than a 9th. He decided it was not. He knocked 3 times. Soft the way you knock when you are apologizing for the knock before your knuckles even land. The metal sound stopped. A pause. Then a voice low and unhurried with the particular flatness of a man who has learned not to be surprised by much. We are closed. Come back tomorrow. Cole knocked again. Slower, a longer pause this time. Then boots on concrete, heavy and deliberate, and the side door beside the bay swung open. The man who opened it was not tall, but he was wide in the way that some men get from decades of actual physical work, rather than a gym wide through the shoulders and the chest with forearms that had seen 30 years of wrenches and engine blocks. He was somewhere in his early 50s, gray at the temples, a face that had been weathered by weather and by other things. He wore a gray work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he had a rag in his left hand that had not been clean since the previous administration. On his right forearm, partially hidden by the rolled sleeve, the edge of a tattoo that Cole could not quite read. The man looked at Cole the way a mechanic looks at an engine he has not diagnosed yet. Slow, methodical. Reading the parts that were not moving, you drunk, the man said. It was not quite a question. No, sir. Hi, no, sir. I do not do that. Running from the cops. Cole looked up for the first time. No, sir, I am not running from anybody. That is the problem. The man said nothing for a moment. The rain fell between them. How much money you got on you? $11. The man looked at the backpack on Cole's shoulder, nearly flat, almost empty. Where's the rest of your stuff? Sold what I had. 3 days, 3 meals. The math runs out. How old are you? 20. Turned 24 days ago. The man worked his jaw slowly like he was chewing on something that did not taste good. His eyes did not leave Cole's face. On the day you turned 20, the man said somebody put you out. Cole's throat moved. He did not answer right away because the words needed a moment before he could trust them. Yes, sir. The man looked at him for another long moment. Then he stepped back from the door. Not all the way, just enough. There is a storage room off the side bay, cot in it. Smells like motor oil and you will hate it. One night, you hear me? One night, in the morning you are gone before I open at 6 and you do not come back until you can pay for something. I do not run a shelter. Cole did not move. He stood in the rain with water running off the back of his collar and something in his chest doing something he did not have language for yet. I asked 9 people before you, he said. His voice came out wrong, thinner than he meant it to. 9. In gas stations, in a church, in a diner. Everybody said no. I kind of stopped expecting yes. The man's expression did not change. Well, do not make me regret it. Get inside before you drown on my step, and I have to explain a body to the sheriff. That was the first night. His name was Walt Donovan. Cole did not learn this until the next morning. Walt was not the kind of man who introduced himself any more than a mountain introduces itself to the weather coming across it. He simply existed in the space, and you learned his name the way you learned anything real, gradually from context, from the name on the invoice pad by the register, from the way the one other mechanic who came in at 7 called him Walt without looking up. The storage room smelled exactly as advertised. The cot was a folding army surplus thing with a canvas surface that crackled when you shifted your weight. There was a single bare bulb overhead that Cole turned off after about 4 minutes because the light felt too much like being examined. He lay in the dark on the crackling canvas and listened to the rain on the metal roof and stared at nothing and thought about Roy. Not about what Roy had said exactly. He had been thinking about the words themselves for 4 days, and they had worn a groove in him like water over stone. What he thought about now was the kitchen. The particular yellow of the linoleum, the coffee cup Roy had been holding, the fact that Roy had not even put the cup down when he said it. He had just looked at Cole over the rim, said what he said, and taken another sip in that casualness, that absolute absence of ceremony around the worst thing anyone had ever said to Cole in his life was the part that still sat in his chest like a stone that would not pass. "You were never worth what they paid me for you." Cole turned over on the crackling canvas. The rain kept coming down on the metal roof. Somewhere in the garage proper, something dripped. He was asleep by 11. At 5:50 the next morning, before the sky outside had decided what color it wanted to be, Cole got up off the cot. He found the broom in the utility corner behind the cot. He found the dustpan, and he started sweeping. Walt arrived at 6 on the nose, not a minute before or after, which Cole would come to understand was simply how the man was built. Walt pulled up the bay door from outside, letting in the gray morning and the smell of the river, and stood for a moment looking at the floor. The entire front section of the garage was clean. 20 years of swept and resettled grit gone. The concrete underneath was the color of old bone pale and slightly surprised at being visible. "What are you doing?" Walt said. "It was 6, Cole said without stopping. "You said before you open. It is 6 you are opening. I did not tell you to sweep. Nobody told me not to." Cole glanced up briefly. "I figured I would earn the cot before I left. Did not want to take a night off a stranger for free." Walt stood in the bay door with the morning behind him and looked at this thin-soaked kid in yesterday's clothes running a broom across his floor with the focused intensity of a man who had a personal grievance against dirt. Something happened in Walt's chest that he recognized and did not like because he had worked very hard for a very long time to keep that particular room locked. "Finish it," he heard himself say. "There is a coffee pot in the back. Do not drink it all." Cole stopped sweeping. His face did something then brief and unguarded that Walt turned away from because it was too much to look at directly. It was the face of someone who had received something small that had, without warning, felt enormous. One night became 2. 2 became a week. Nobody decided this. It simply kept not ending the way certain things do when 2 people are too stubborn or too afraid to name what they are doing. Cole worked with the single-minded focus of someone trying to outrun memory. He washed bikes until the chrome threw the morning back at you sharp enough to squint. He reorganized the tool wall by seal and function with a precision that bordered on the obsessive. He rebuilt a parts shelf that had been listing to the left for what Walt later said was probably 3 years, and then, without being asked, built a second one beside it. He did not touch the register. He did not take so much as $1 from the tip jar that the few walk-in customers occasionally left. He was meticulous about this in a way that Walt recognized slowly was not just honesty. It was the behavior of a person who had learned that the accusation would come regardless and had decided to give it no ground to stand on. On the 9th day, Walt asked the question he had been circling. "Your mother. Where is she?" Cole was cleaning a carburetor, his hands steady and dark with grease. "Cemetery off Route 9. Died when I was 13. "Your father?" "Never had one. Had a stepfather." Cole set down the carburetor. His hands stayed on the workbench. "When my mom got sick, the state sent money for my care, for my housing and food paid to my stepfather because he was the legal guardian. He cashed every check for 7 years and spent it on himself, and I never said anything because I was a kid, and where was I going to go? You do not go anywhere when you are a kid. There is nowhere to go." Walt set his wrench down very quietly on the bench beside him. The day I turned 20, Cole went on his voice flat in that way that cost more than crying the money stopped. I was not a dependent anymore. He looked at me across the kitchen and he said, Cole paused. You were never worth what they paid me for you. Then he put my stuff on the porch. The garage was very quiet for a moment, just the fluorescent light and the distant sound of a truck passing on the highway. Walt had been in a place years ago where he had heard things said to men in the particular vocabulary of absolute contempt. He had heard those words used as weapons the way only people with real power over you can use them. He recognized the specific weight Cole was carrying, not because he was sympathetic by nature, but because he had carried the same shape of thing once himself. That man, Walt said low and even, is a coward and a thief. The law has got a name for what he did to you, and someday it will find him. He picked his wrench back up. But that is not today's problem. Today's problem is you are cleaning that carburetor wrong. Come here. I will show you once. You do not make me show you twice. That was the day Cole stopped being a kid sleeping in a storage room. Neither of them would have named it. Men like these two did not name things they were afraid to lose. But something shifted in the quality of the silence between them, became less provisional, less like a thing that might end tomorrow, and more like the beginning of something that had decided to stay. It was in the second week that Cole found the newspaper. He was reorganizing the storage room on a slow Tuesday afternoon, a task that had expanded from 40 minutes to several hours because the storage room had apparently been used as a filing system for the last 2 decades by a man who believed that stacking things on top of other things was a form of organization. In the back of the lowest shelf, behind a rusted coffee can of mismatched bolts and a manual for a 1987 Harley Softail that had seen significant water damage, he found the box. It was a shoebox with the lid taped shut. The tape was old, yellowed, and brittle at the corners, the kind of seal you put on something when you are trying to keep it closed rather than just closed. Cole sat back on his heels and looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at the door. Walt was in the bay. Cole could hear the low, irregular sound of the radio Walt kept on the workbench and the intermittent clank of metal. He should have put the box back. He knew this. He put it on his knee and peeled back the tape at the corner just enough and lifted the lid. Inside was a single folded newspaper, brittle. Now the paper gone the amber of old photographs. Cole unfolded it carefully on his knee, the crease marks white where the paper had been folded too long. The headline was from the Missoula County Courier, 20 years ago. The photograph beside the lead article showed a younger version of the man currently in the bay. No gray at the temples, the same wide jaw and the same flat eyes, wearing a different kind of expression than the one Cole knew something unfinished and uncertain in it. The article was 17 column inches. Cole read every word. He sat with it for a long time after he finished reading. Then he folded the newspaper carefully back along its crease marks, placed it back in the box, pressed the tape back down as flat as it would go, and put the box back in the exact position he had found it. He was precise about this. He put the Harley manual on top of it. He put the coffee can back in front of that. Then he went back to work. That evening, Cole got up before Walt arrived in the morning and made coffee. He made enough for 2 cups, measured carefully because the grounds were running low, and he had not yet figured out how to bring it up without it feeling like asking for something. He poured Walt's into the mug that was always on the left side of the drip machine, the one with the handle that had been re-glued at some point and was slightly off-center. Walt came in at 6, pulled up the bay door, came back and saw the 2 cups. He did not say anything. He picked up his cup and drank from it and set it back down and went to work. Neither of them ever mentioned the newspaper. Not that day, not any day after that. But something changed in the specific texture of the silence between them. Subtle as a key change in music present in the way Walt explained things differently after that morning, with a slightly longer patience as though he had stopped assuming Cole would leave and started assuming he would not. Present in the way Cole worked with a particular quality of steadiness as though he had considered something and decided. He knew everything now. He was still here. That was the only conversation they needed to have, and they had had it without saying a word. The SUV appeared for the first time on a Monday, 3 weeks after Cole's first night on the cot. Cole noticed it because he noticed things. This was not a skill he had been taught so much as one he had developed the way animals develop certain abilities through sustained necessity. 7 years of living with Roy had made him attentive to the specific texture of wrongness, The way a room felt before something bad was said in it, the way a man's shoulders looked before his hands decided what to do. He noticed things and he cataloged them, and he filed them away in the part of his mind that was always quietly calculating exits and contingencies. The SUV was black, and it was large, and it had no front plates, which in Montana meant it either had dealer tags or it had nothing, and this one had nothing. It was parked across the highway from the garage entrance, nose pointing toward the road, as though it had pulled in facing outward, specifically, which was not the way most people parked. It had been there when Cole opened the bay at 7:45, and it was still there at noon, and it was still there at 3. Walt noticed it at 3:15. Cole watched him notice it, watched the slight stiffening in Walt's posture, the way his eyes went to it, and stayed just a second too long. Walt said nothing. Cole said nothing. They both went back to work. The SUV left at 4:30. On Tuesday, it was back at 8. On Wednesday morning at 10, the driver got out. He was in his mid-40s, and he was dressed in the particular way of men who have expensive suits and wear them to places that are not offices. The suit slightly too good for the context, the shoes too clean for the gravel lot. He had a face that had learned to smile in a way that did not involve the eyes. He walked across the highway with the easy gait of a man who was accustomed to having the conversation go the way he wanted. He stood in the mouth of the bay and looked around at the garage the way people look at real estate they have already mentally purchased. "Mr. Donovan," he said, "beautiful piece of property you have here. Corner lot, highway frontage. You ever think about what it is worth?" "I think it is worth me not having this conversation," Walt said, without looking up from the engine he was working on. The man's name was Ray Voss. He said this himself unhurried, as though the mention of his name was a kind of courtesy he was extending rather than an introduction. He represented Stanton Development, he said, and Stanton Development had a significant interest in this section of corridor, and the offer they were prepared to make was, he used the word generous, twice a word that Cole noticed carries in it, the implication that you are being given something rather than simply paid for what you have. "The offer is friendly right now," Voss said. "Markets shift. Permits get complicated. Insurance," he let a pause live in the word, "gets expensive. Friendly is better. Do you not think?" Walt set down his wrench. He turned from the engine and looked at Voss and walked toward him until the distance between them became uncomfortable. He stopped close enough that Voss had to make a choice about whether to hold his ground or step back. Voss held his ground. Barely. "I did 15 years in a place," Walt said quietly, "that made men like you ask permission to use the bathroom. You want to threaten me, you bring something scarier than a suit and a thesaurus." Voss's smile stayed where it was, but something went out of it. He stepped back. One step, then another, and he was walking toward the SUV with the careful, controlled movement of a man choosing to walk when he would prefer to stride. At the driver's door, he paused and turned, and his eyes found Cole standing at the workbench across the bay. They stayed on Cole for a moment that lasted a beat longer than it should have. Long enough to mean something. "Bit young to get tangled up in an old man's decisions," Voss said. "Shame if he got hurt over somebody else's stubbornness." Then he got in and drove away, and the SUV's taillights disappeared north up the highway. Walt turned. Cole was already writing, not taking out his phone, writing on a piece of yellow notepad paper from the pad next to the register with a ballpoint pen, with the systematic precision of a person who has done this before or who has thought about doing this before in enough detail that it comes naturally. "What are you doing?" Walt said. Cole looked up. He was on his third line. The time. The name Ray Voss has given the company Stanton Development, the description of the SUV, and the fact that it had been parked across the highway since Monday. The specific words about insurance getting expensive, which Cole had already recognized as carrying the particular legal shape of a threat. "He is on the bay camera," Cole said. "The camera catches the road, and his right cuff had a logo stitched in small blue thread, same as the lettering on the toolbox in the back of the SUV. I wrote down the time and what he said and the part where he looked at me, because he threatened me, Walt, in front of a witness, and that is worth something if it ever has to be." Walt stared at him. Cole folded the paper and crouched and placed it in a flat cardboard box that had been holding brake cable packaging under the far end of the workbench. He slid the box back in. Cole stood back up. He looked at Walt directly. 7 years living with the man who was stealing from me taught me one thing with real clarity," Cole said. Nobody believes you without proof. They want to believe the person who looks more like someone they should believe, and that is never going to be me, and it is probably never going to be you either. So you need proof, documented proof, the kind that does not disappear and does not depend on whether someone decides to trust you. He looked at the box under the bench. I should have kept proof back then. I did not because I was 13 years old, and I did not know I would need it. I am not making that mistake twice. Walt stood in the middle of his garage and looked at this 20-year-old kid, thin and precise, and carrying a damage that had not made him bitter, but had instead made him careful, had made him into a person who wrote things down and used words like documented and witness, who thought about proof, not abstractly, but operationally the way you think about it, when your survival has once depended on its presence. He did not say anything. That evening, after he had locked the bay and turned off the lights, Walt sat in the dark at the workbench for a while before he left. He had not sent a personal message to Deke Callahan in close to a year. They spoke when the club spoke at the chapter level, but the specific frequency of the old friendship had quieted over time the way old things quiet, not with a reason, just with the weight of years and distance. Walt got out his phone. He sat with it for a while. Then he typed the message. Got a kid here, Walt wrote. Reminds me of how we were. Do not let me screw it up. He sent it and put the phone away and drove home, and the box under the workbench sat in the dark with its first piece of paper inside it, and the whole county was quiet and nothing yet had broken open. But something had begun. The box did not stay empty long. In the 3 weeks that followed, the campaign against Donovan Ironworks arrived the way certain kinds of pressure arrive quietly at first, carrying the surface appearance of coincidence designed so that each individual piece could be explained away, while the cumulative weight of it pressed down steadily, methodically like a thumb. A brick came through the front window on a Thursday night. Not a rock, not an accident, a rectangular building, brick the kind you do not pick up by the side of the road, and under it a piece of white cardstock with one word printed on it in capital letters. Sell. Cole was the one who heard the glass. He came out of the storage room barefoot on the concrete and found the brick and found the note and stood looking at it for a moment in the cold air coming through the broken window. Then he photographed the brick. He photographed the note. He photographed the angle of the throw from the street, the distance, the ground outside. He bagged the note in a Ziploc he found in the break room. He put the bag and the photographs in the box. Then he called Walt. Walt arrived in 9 minutes. He looked at the window, and he looked at the box, and he looked at Cole, and he did not say you should not be here or this is not your problem or go back to sleep. He said find the dustpan, and they swept the glass up together in the dark. 2 of Walt's oldest customers called to cancel in the following week. Cole noticed the specific quality of their voices when they called the careful, neutral flatness of people saying a prepared thing. He asked Walt if he could reach out to them personally. Walt said it was his call. Cole called them separately, and he did not ask why they were canceling, which would have put them on the defensive. He asked them if they were all right. He asked this with a specific quality of directness and genuine concern that was harder to deflect than a question about business, and because of it, one of them broke. A man had come to his house, the customer said, had mentioned his daughter's school, had suggested it would be healthier to take his business elsewhere for a while. The customer's voice was ashamed and angry, in equal measure the particular combination of a person who knows what they have done and knows why they did it and cannot fully forgive either. Cole asked him if he would be willing to put that in writing. A long pause. I have kids, the customer said. I know, Cole said. I am not asking you to fight anybody. I am asking you to write down what happened to you, sign it, and let me keep it somewhere safe. That is all. Proof does not expire. It just waits. 2 days later, the customer came by the garage in person and handed Cole a folded piece of paper. Cole shook his hand and said thank you, and the customer left without meeting Walt's eyes, and Cole put the paper in the box without ceremony and went back to the carburetor he had been cleaning. Walt watched this from across the garage. He thought about what it took to be 20 years old with $11 and a borrowed cot in a storage room, and to think not about surviving this week, but about building a case, about anticipating a legal strategy 3 moves ahead, about the long game when you did not have enough money to buy lunch. He thought about himself at 20, which had not looked like this at all. The box under the bench kept filling. The week the second customer called to cancel, Cole filed a report with the Missoula County Sheriff about the broken window. The deputy who came out was young and polite and wrote things down without any visible conviction that anything would happen as a result. Cole gave him copies, not originals, of the note and the photographs. He kept the originals in the box. He had not yet told Walt about the thing he had done with the $12. It had been 2 weeks after the first night when the box had just begun, and Cole had understood, with the particular cold clarity that comes to people who have been poor long enough to think in contingencies, that the box could be taken, that the box under the bench was only as safe as the garage it sat in, and if someone wanted badly enough to make both of them disappear, they could. Evidence needed a secondary location. Evidence needed to exist somewhere that four men in a garage could not reach. He had walked 3 blocks to the First Consolidated Bank of Missoula on a Tuesday afternoon, which was the afternoon Walt drove to the parts supplier in Ronan, and was gone for 4 hours. He had $12. The minimum deposit on a safe deposit box rental was $10. He had asked the branch manager, a woman who had looked at him with the particular cautious kindness of someone deciding whether to be moved by a situation, whether he could co-sign the box with a second party, his employer without that employer being present, if he had the employer's existing account number, and could provide a government ID for himself. The branch manager had said that was not standard procedure. Cole had explained quietly and without drama that he was storing documents relevant to a potential legal matter, and that the secondary signatory on the account needed to be insulated from knowledge of the box's contents for legal reasons related to witness testimony. He had used those exact words. The branch manager had looked at him for a long moment and then had called over her supervisor, and between the two of them, 15 minutes later, the box existed. He had not told Walt. He did not tell Walt now in the weeks of filling and photographing and documenting. He told himself it was because Walt could not testify to what Walt did not know, which was true. He told himself it was a strategic decision, which it was. He did not examine too closely the other reason, which was that he needed to know he had built something real before he let anyone else see it, because he had learned from Roy that the things you showed people before they were finished were the things they could take from you. And this was the one thing he was not going to let anyone take. Cole was reorganizing the brake cable shelf on a Thursday afternoon when Walt stopped by the bench and stood there for a moment in the particular way he stood when he was going to say something that was not about the work. "You ever going to tell me what is in that box?" Walt said. Cole kept his hands on the cable housing. "Everything I have," he said, and then quieter. "Everything I can think of that might matter later." Walt was quiet for a moment. "That man Voss," he said, "he is going to come back." "I know." Cole looked at the box under the bench. "And when he does," Cole said, "we are going to be ready. Both of us. Not just me." Walt looked at the boss. His jaw worked slowly. Then he nodded, once the way men nod when there is nothing wrong with what has been said and nothing needs to be added. He went back to the engine. Cole went back to the cable housing. The light moved across the bay floor the way it always did, slow and indifferent and golden. And outside on the highway, the cars went past and the mountain to the east held its shape against the sky. And in the dark, under the workbench, the box sat with its papers inside it, patient as a warrant, waiting for the moment that was coming, whether anyone was ready for it or not. The pressure did not arrive all at once. That was the thing about Stanton's method that Cole came to understand over the weeks that followed, the way you understand a weather system by watching it move. It did not come as a single storm. It came as a slow erosion, patient and deliberate, the kind designed to make you question whether you were imagining the pattern before the pattern finished you. The week after Voss's visit, a truck from the parts supplier in Ronan arrived 2 days late with half the order. The driver shrugged and said the warehouse had the wrong paperwork. Walt called the supplier, a man he had done business with for 11 years, and the supplier was apologetic and vague in equal measure. Cole listened to the call from the bay and wrote down the date in the supplier's name and the specific language the man used, because specific language tells you things that facts alone do not. The week after that, a city inspector appeared on a Tuesday morning without a scheduled appointment and spent 90 minutes walking the property with a clipboard. He found 3 items he said needed addressing, 2 of which Walt had never been cited for in 2 decades of operation. Cole photographed the inspection report. He looked up the inspector's name in the county records that night on his phone and found that the same inspector had signed off on 3 Stanton development properties in the previous 18 months without a single citation. He added this to the box. He added a note explaining the connection. Walt watched him do this and said nothing. The box under the bench had become a different kind of thing now. It had started as a reflex, the trained survival habit of a boy who had learned too young that the people with authority over you will always be believed before you will. But it had grown into something more deliberate, more architectural. Cole understood with the cold, operational clarity that had become his native language that he was not building a grievance record. He was building a case. He was building it for someone else to use because he also understood that he was 20 years old with $11 and no last name that meant anything in Missoula County, and that when the time came, the case would need to be carried by someone with the standing to carry it. He did not know yet who that person was. He just kept building. The third week brought the phone calls. 2 more customers, both long-term, both the kind of men who paid on time and recommended Walt by name to their friends. The first called on a Monday and said he was taking his bike to a shop in Ronan. For a while, personal reasons, he was sorry. The second called on Wednesday, and his voice had a specific tightness in it, the tightness of a man saying a prepared thing against his own instinct. Cole asked Walt if he could make those calls himself. Walt looked at him for a moment and then said yes. Cole called the second customer first because the tightness in his voice had told Cole something was still undecided in him. He did not open with business. He asked the man how his family was. He asked about the man's truck, which had come in for exhaust work 6 weeks back. He asked these things with genuine attention, and after about 4 minutes of this, the man stopped performing calm and just said it. Someone had come to his house. A man in a good suit, pleasant, unhurried, had sat in the kitchen and complimented the photographs on the wall and mentioned the name of the man's youngest daughter's school, the grade she was in, what time school let out. Had said he hoped nothing complicated the family's routine going forward. Cole listened to all of it without speaking. When the man finished, Cole said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to hear it the way I mean it, which is not as pressure. You do not owe Walt anything. You do not owe me anything. What happened to your family is not your fault, and pulling your business is a completely reasonable response to being threatened, and I will never tell anyone otherwise." He paused. "But if you were willing," he said, "to write down what that man said to you in your kitchen, just the facts, just what he said, and when he said it, and what he looked like, and sign it, I would keep it somewhere safe, and it would never be used without your knowledge. Not to testify, not to put you in front of anyone, just to exist, because proof does not expire. It just waits for the right moment." A long silence on the line. "My kids," the man said. "I know," Cole said. "This is not for now. This is for later, when later looks different than today." 4 days later, the man came to the garage in person and handed Cole a folded piece of paper and shook his hand and left without looking at Walt. Cole put the paper in the box and went back to work. Then came the morning. Harold Stanton came himself. Cole had seen photographs of Stanton online, the county business listings, the Missoula Chamber of Commerce page, a profile in the regional paper from 3 years back. Stanton was 58, built solidly, without being large, with the kind of face that had learned early how to be trusted. Silver at the temples, a quality of stillness about him that was not calm so much as the appearance of calm, the stillness of a man who had learned that you could communicate enormous pressure without raising your voice, that the raised voice was for people who had no other tool. He came on a Wednesday morning in the second week of November alone, no Voss, no SUV. He drove himself in a black sedan, parked it facing out in the lot, and walked into the bay at a pace that suggested he had nowhere else to be. He looked at the garage with the specific, evaluative attention of a man deciding how much it would cost to tear something down. Then his eyes found Cole at the workbench and stopped. He studied Cole for a moment, the way you study something that has surprised you by being more substantial than you expected. Then he said quietly and without any theater in it, the thing that he had come to say. "A young man with nothing to lose," Stanton said, "often does not understand that his situation does not protect the people around him." He inclined his head very slightly toward Walt, that sometimes the people closest to him are the ones who absorb the cost of his choices. He let that settle. Then he nodded once pleasantly, as though he had made a remark about the weather, and walked back to his car and drove away. The bay was very quiet after the sound of his engine faded. Walt was looking at Cole. Cole was looking at the door where Stanton had been. His hands on the workbench were completely still, and Walt could see from across the bay that something had changed in the quality of Cole's stillness, that the careful operational calm that Cole wore most of the time had been disturbed, not broken, but displaced like a level that has been set precisely and then felt the table shift under it. That man, Cole said, is not like Voss. No, Walt said. Voss is the instrument. Stanton is the intention. Cole picked up the torque wrench he had set down before Stanton arrived and turned it in his hands without using it. He is telling me it is not me he is going to hurt. He is telling me it is you. Walt was quiet. Cole set the wrench down. He worked for the rest of the morning at the same pace, the same precision, but Walt noticed that he went to the box under the bench twice in the following hour, adding things, and that his handwriting, when Cole held the pen, was smaller than usual. Tighter. The handwriting of a person making sure that nothing was wasted. That night, for the first time, Walt told Cole what little he usually told anyone about the 15 years. Not the events, not the specifics, but the shape of the experience. What it had made him afterward. How he had come out of it with a specific knowledge of the difference between men who used legitimate power and men who used fear, and why he had built the garage not just as a business, but as a thing that belonged entirely to him, with no partners and no debt and no one who had any claim on it. He told Cole this in the bay after closing both of them, leaning against the workbench in the dark, the overhead fluorescence off just the work light on the far bench casting everything in that particular warm amber. I built this place to be mine, Walt said. Not to prove something, just because I needed one thing in this world that was not contingent on someone else's decision. He was quiet a moment. That is what he is really after. Not the land. He can get land. He is after the fact of it belonging to me. Cole said nothing for a moment. Then he said quietly, without looking up from the concrete between his feet, I need to tell you something I should have told you 3 weeks ago. He told Walt about the bank. He laid it out the way he laid everything out, with precision and without drama. The $12, the safe deposit box, Walt's account number used as the co-signatory without Walt's knowledge. The fact that the originals of every document in the box under the bench had been in that bank box for the past 3 weeks, accessible only to Cole and to Walt, known only to Cole. Walt listened to all of it without speaking. When Cole finished, Walt was quiet for long enough that the silence took on weight. You were in this garage 2 weeks and you opened a bank box using my account number without telling me, Walt said. Cosign, Cole said. Not in your name alone. Your name is on it as a secondary party. You could access it. You just did not know it existed. Walt turned the rag over in his hands. You had $12, 10 for the rental, 2 left over. Walt made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. You did not tell me because you did not want me to be able to testify to knowing where the originals were. If someone asks you, Hull said you can say honestly that you did not know. You cannot lie about what you do not know. Walt looked at him sideways. You are 20 years old, he said. Yes, sir. And you are sitting in my garage after 3 weeks on a cot, and you are thinking about the legal vulnerability of my witness testimony. Cole said nothing. You are the most exhausting person, Walt said, I have ever met in my life. He said this in a tone of voice that made it mean the opposite. He picked up his coffee cup from the bench and found it empty and set it back down. I would have said yes, Walt said. If you had asked me, I would have said yes. You did not have to do it without telling me. I know, Cole said, but I needed to build something real before I let you see it. Because I learned a long time ago that you do not show people things before they are finished. Unfinished things can be taken. Walt sat with that for a while. Yeah, he said finally, I know something about that. They stayed in the amber light a while longer without talking, and the highway outside was quiet, and the box under the bench and its twin at the bank both sat in the dark with their papers inside them, and Cole Mercer at 20 years old had never in his life felt less alone. The 4 men came on a Friday afternoon in the 3rd week of November. Cole saw them through the side window of the bay before they reached the door, and the specific configuration of them, the way they walked 4 abreast and unhurried with the deliberate, spatial claim of men who had been told the outcome in advance, told him before they spoke what kind of visit this was. They were not Stanton's suit and briefcase variety. They were the other kind, the kind you sent when the message was no longer diplomatic. The largest of them came in first and stood in the center of the bay and dropped a folder on the workbench between himself and Walt. Inside the folder was a single sheet of paper with a number on it, printed, not handwritten, and the Stanton Development letterhead at the top. "Sign it," the man said. Walt did not look at the paper. He looked at the man. "Get off my property." The man nodded once as though this response had been anticipated and accounted for. Then the second man moved to the tool wall that Cole had spent 2 months organizing and swept his arm across a 4-foot section of it and sent 40 pounds of organized tools crashing to the concrete floor. The sound was enormous in the enclosed space, metal on concrete, and it kept happening. The secondary impacts, the rolling, the settling. The third man crossed to the rack of customer bikes and hit the first one with an open palm and sent it into the second, a slow, deliberate domino that neither man rushed to stop. The fourth man stood by the door and watched Cole. Walt had gone very still in the particular way of men who have learned to be still in the moments before they are not still, the specific gathering quality of someone deciding. Cole stepped forward. He did not step toward the men. He stepped into the open center of the bay between the men and Walt, which was a different thing entirely, and the largest of the four looked at him the way you look at an obstacle you had not planned for and decided was not a real obstacle, and crossed to him in 3 steps and shoved him in the chest with both hands. Cole went back and hit the edge of the workbench and went down onto the concrete, one palm, taking the impact of the other, catching the corner of a brake line bracket that opened a thin cut across his palm. The garage went silent. Cole sat on the concrete for a moment with his palm bleeding and looked at the man standing over him. He was aware of Walt behind him, the quality of Walt's silence, which was not the silence of a man doing nothing, but the silence of a man holding something enormous by a thread. He was aware of the 4 of them and their collective size, and the folder still sitting on the workbench, with its number on it in the 4-foot section of wall that had been his wall. He got up. He did not swing. He did not say anything about what had just happened to him. He stood up slowly and he turned to the workbench, and he reached underneath it and he pulled out the box. He set it on the workbench surface. He opened it. "You want to know what I have been doing in this garage for 2 months, Cole said. His voice was level, completely level. The voice of a person who had decided a long time ago that the only advantage he had in any situation was not losing the thing that other people lost. "You want to know what is in here?" He looked at the largest man. "Photographs, dates, times, plate numbers, the inspection report and the inspector's name, and the 3 Stanton properties he approved without citation in the last 18 months. 2 signed statements from customers your people went to their houses and threatened. A recording of Ray Voss standing in this bay telling me it would be a shame if a young man got hurt over someone else's stubbornness. A photograph of Voss in this bay with the Stanton Development logo on his cuff visible. A recorded phone call discussing specific customers and their families by name." Cole looked at the man steadily. "This is a copy. The originals are not here, and they are not somewhere 4 men in a garage can reach. You want to take this box, take it. You will have accomplished nothing except adding your own visit today to the record that already exists." He paused. "You are on camera. I noted the time you walked in from the clock on that wall. You assaulted me on camera. If you want to bet on whether the word maybe is worth a fraud investigation, a criminal intimidation charge, and whatever else is in these files, then take the box." The largest man looked at Cole for a long moment. Then he looked at the other 3. Something traveled between them that was not language. Then they all heard it. Low at first, the kind of sound that you feel in your sternum before your ears properly register, it a vibration that the body recognizes before the mind does. Then it grew. Not 1 engine, not 10, something between a sound and a weather event, directional and purposeful, and getting louder at a rate that did not allow for the possibility of coincidence. The man by the door turned and looked through the side window, and his face changed. All 4 of them moved to the mouth of the bay. Cole did not move. He stood at the workbench with the box in front of him in his bleeding palm and his level breathing, and watched the expressions change in the faces of 4 men who had walked into this garage certain of the outcome. Through the open bay, he could see the highway. The first set of headlights turned in from the north, then the second. Then they were not individual headlights anymore. They were a continuous ribbon of light that kept coming and coming, accompanied by a sound that the 4 men in the bay were now feeling in their boots, a low, pervasive roar that occupied all the available air. They came from both directions, from the north down the highway and from the south up it, and they turned into the lot in a stream that did not stop. Big bikes and bigger ones, riders in leather and riders in denim, the particular organized calm of men who have ridden a long way for a specific reason and arrived without hurry because they were certain of where they stood. They filled the lot. They filled the road shoulder. The engines cut one by one until there were 200 of them standing in the cold November afternoon in complete silence, their breath visible in the air, and not a single one of them moved past the mouth of the bay. They did not need to. Cole watched the four men's faces and watched what happened to men when the math of a situation changes faster than they can recalculate. A rider near the front pulled off his helmet. He was older, 60 at least, with a gray beard that reached his chest, in a face that had been built by decades of decisions and weather, and the specific wear of a man who had made his peace with most of what life had asked of him. He had the settled quality of someone who had nothing left to contain because he had already decided everything. Walt walked past Cole, past the four men, out to the mouth of the bay. The older rider looked at him. "Heard a man was having trouble," the rider said. "Heard the man was you, Grizzly. Figured that could not be right. Nobody is dumb enough to lean on you." His eyes moved slow and deliberate to the four men standing in the bay behind Walt. "And yet," he said, one of the four started to speak. The older rider did not look at him. He did not raise his hand or raise his voice. He simply did not look at him, and the weight of 200 men's attention made the speech die before it fully formed. "Deke," Callahan Walt said. It came out slightly different than his usual voice, the way a man's voice shifts when something he did not let himself want has arrived anyway. Deke stepped into the bay. He looked at the tool wall on the floor. He looked at the bikes that had been knocked over. He looked at Cole standing at the workbench with the box and the bleeding palm. He studied Cole for a moment the way Walt had on the first night, slow and thorough, and Cole met his eyes because Cole had learned that you did not look away from men whose respect meant something. Then Deke turned to the four men. "Here's what happens now," Deke said. His voice was quiet and entirely without performance. "You are going to pick up every tool you knocked off that wall. You are going to stand those bikes back up and check each one for damage and tell this man what you find. Then you are going to get in your vehicle and drive away, and you are going to tell whoever sent you that this garage is under our attention now. Not just today, permanently." The largest man looked at the 200 people in the lot. He looked at Deke. He looked at Walt. His hand moved. It moved toward his side, toward his waistband. Not all the way, not a committed motion, but enough. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than any that had existed in the bay before it. 200 men did not move and did not speak, and the quality of their stillness was the stillness of a thing that has made its decision and is simply waiting for the other party to understand what they have in front of them. Walt said one word: "Don't." Just that. Flat and certain, the single syllable of a man who had been in the room where that hand movement was the last mistake some people ever made. The hand stopped. It moved back. "Pick up the tools," Deke said again. Same tone, same pace. They picked up the tools. It took them just under 5 minutes, and every second of it was the specific humiliation of men who had come to deliver a message and were instead delivering something else entirely. And 200 people watched in complete silence. No commentary, no laughter, no gesture. Just the absolute attention of people who understood that the silence was the point. When the last tool was back on the wall, the largest man straightened and looked at Cole one final time with something in his face that was no longer contempt. It was a reevaluation, the specific expression of a person who has encountered something they did not expect and have not yet finished deciding what it means. He left without speaking. The other three followed. The SUV's engine started and the gravel crunched, and they were gone. Cole let out a breath that he had not been fully aware he was holding. Deke came back to the workbench and looked at the box and looked at Cole's palm. "You gonna tell me what is in there?" Deke said. "Yes, sir," Cole said. And he did. He told all of it. Deke stood at the workbench with his arms crossed and listened the way Walt listened, without interruption, without expression, giving the story the weight it deserved by not trying to lighten it. When Cole finished, Deke was quiet for a moment. "You did this," Deke said, "in 2 months on a cot without pay, with $11. 12 by then," Cole said. "I found $1 in the couch in the storage room. Something broke open in Deke's face, genuine and sudden. He looked at Walt. Walt was studying the floor with great attention. Walt Deke said, "You sent me a message 4 weeks ago that said, 'Do not let me screw this up.'" Walt did not look up. "I do not think," Deke said slowly, "that is going to be a problem." Outside in the lot, 200 people were settling in the way riders settle when they have completed the thing they came to do and have decided that the evening is young enough for everything else. Someone had found a portable grill in one of the saddlebags. Someone else had a radio. The cold November air smelled like exhaust and charcoal, and the specific warm noise of 200 people who are exactly where they intended to be. Cole stood at the workbench in the middle of it all and felt something he had not felt in long enough that he almost did not recognize it. Not safety exactly, though that was part of it. Not gratitude, though that was part of it too. It was the feeling of not being the only one, of having, for the first time in a very long time, other people standing in the same direction as him. He had to go to the back of the garage so that nobody would see his face. Walt found him there a few minutes later, leaning against the back wall, looking out through the small window at the lit-up lot. Walt stood next to him. Neither of them spoke for a while. "Why did they come?" Cole said finally. "All of them, for a garage." Walt was quiet for a moment. "They did not come for the garage," he said. Over the years, he went on slower than Cole had ever heard him speak. "When a man got out and had nowhere to go, I gave him something to do for a while. When a bike died and a man's rent was due the same week, I fixed it and called it square. When somebody needed, he stopped. I did not keep count." He looked out at the lot. "Word gets around," he said. "And when the word came that somebody was leaning on me, every one of those days I never wrote down came due at once." He turned and looked at Cole directly. "You did the same thing without knowing it," Walt said. "You sat with two men who were scared and gave them a way to matter. You asked a question when you could have let it go. That is the whole thing. You open the door for people without keeping score, and someday when you need it, the door opens back." Cole looked at the lit lot, at the grill smoke and the radio, and the 200 people who had ridden a long way on a cold Friday afternoon. He thought about the morning of the cot, the swept floor, the 2 cups of coffee. He thought about $12 and a bank box and a piece of paper with a number on it, folded in a Ziploc in the box under the bench. He thought about Stanton's voice saying what it had said in this bay 3 weeks ago. The young man with nothing to lose often does not understand. He looked at the lot and thought quietly, and with complete certainty, you were wrong about that. But none of that was over yet. There was still Stanton. There was still the thing that none of them knew was coming, the thing that Stanton had been building in the background for 8 months, with the patience of a man who plans not just for winning, but for the contingency of losing, and who intends to burn everything on his way out the door. That part had not arrived yet, but it was close, and it was moving. Agent Brenda Kemp drove a government-issue sedan, the color of old asphalt, and she parked it with the nose facing out, which Cole noticed because it was the same way as Stanton parked, and he had learned that people who parked facing out were people who thought about leaving before they arrived. She got out, and she did not slow down when she saw 200 riders in the lot. She walked through them the way water moves through a field, finding the path of least resistance, without pausing to consider the alternatives, and she came into the bay with her badge already visible on her belt, in a leather folder under her arm, in the particular unhurried quality of a person who has been working toward this moment for long enough that arriving at it feels less like urgency and more like the completion of a very long equation. She looked at Deke, she looked at Walt, she looked at Cole in his bandaged palm and the box on the workbench. Then she looked at the young county deputy who had arrived 40 minutes earlier on a call about a disturbance and had been standing at the edge of the lot in a state of increasing uncertainty ever since. "Put the notepad away," she said. "You are about to be very glad you did not do anything in the last hour that you cannot take back." The deputy's mouth opened. He had a call, he said, about a hostage situation, about a juvenile being held on the property. Brenda Kemp opened her folder. The call came from a man named Ray Voss, she said, who works for Stanton Development, who placed it approximately 4 hours after he and 3 other men assaulted a person on this property and were removed by 200 witnesses. She looked at the deputy without hostility, but without any particular patience either. "I am Agent Brenda Kemp, Financial Crimes Task Force Federal. We have had Harold Stanton under active investigation for 14 months. And I would estimate that the young man standing at that workbench has more on Stanton in that box than I have managed to collect with 3 separate subpoenas. The lot turned. 200 heads moved without coordination, the way a field of grass moves in the same wind, and the collective attention landed on Cole standing at the workbench with the box in the bandaged palm. 14 months, Walt said. 14 months, Kemp confirmed. Land fraud going back 7 years. Forged easement documents. A pattern of coordinated intimidation across 6 properties in 3 counties. 2 fires that the insurance carriers have significant questions about. And a relationship with the county DA's office that has made obtaining warrants for further evidence collection. She paused, a specific kind of frustrating. She looked at Cole. 3 weeks ago, she said a man named Gerald Hollis walked into my field office. He runs a feed supply store on Connell Avenue. He told me about a young man at a garage on the North Highway who had asked him to write down what had happened to him. He said the young man told him that proof was the only thing no one could take away from you. She looked at the box. Mr. Hollis's statement gave me the probable cause for a warrant application I have been trying to file since last spring. I have been waiting on approval for 72 hours, waiting for a second piece of corroboration. She opened her folder wider. I would very much like to see what is in that box. Cole did not move right away. He had carried the box through 2 months of darkness, of broken glass and canceled customers, and the specific grinding weight of knowing what was coming and not being able to stop it, yet only document it, only build it, one careful layer at a time. He had carried it the way you carry the one thing that is entirely yours, the way you carry the evidence of your own life, when no one else has bothered to record it. Every instinct that Roy had carved into him over 7 years said, do not hand it to anyone. Said they will lose it or bury it or decide it is not enough and give it back with an apology. He looked at Walt. It is your call, Walt said. Nobody makes it for you, Wu. Not me, not her. You built it. It is yours. Cole looked at Kemp. It is a copy, he said. He handed her the box. The originals are in a safe deposit box at First Consolidated on Brook Street. I opened it 6 weeks ago with Walt's account number as the co-signatory. He looked at Walt briefly. I was going to tell you sooner. I just did not want you to have to lie to anyone about knowing where the originals were. You cannot testify to what you do not know. Walt stared at him with the expression of a man who has stopped being surprised and moved directly into something quieter and more permanent. I opened the box with $11, Cole said. 10 for the rental deposit, 1 left over. He paused. I found $1 in the storage room couch 2 days later. Somewhere in the lot, Deke Callahan made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh, sudden and genuine, the kind that gets surprised out of a person against their will. Kemp was not laughing. She was moving through the box with both hands, and her face was changing the way faces change when something exceeds what they prepared themselves to find. She moved through the photographs and the dated entries and the signed customer statements and the Ziploc note from the brick and the recordings listed by date and transcript summary, and she turned pages with increasing speed and decreasing professionalism, which is to say she was forgetting to look like an agent and starting to look like a person. The recorded call, she said. The one with Voss. You have the Hartley parcel mentioned by name. Yes, Cole said. She looked up. Do you understand what you have in here? This is not harassment documentation. This is pattern evidence. This is the foundation of a RICO filing. Cole said nothing. What is RICO, Walt said. It is the difference, Kemp said, between Stanton paying a significant fine and Stanton going to federal prison, along with everyone in his organization who helped him get there. She snapped the box shut. I need the originals. I need them tonight before anyone with a reason to make them disappear knows I have these copies. It is Friday, Cole said. Bank closed at 5. It is 5:40. The lot was quiet for a moment. Deke stood up from where he had been leaning against a bike. What is the branch manager's name, he said. You are not robbing a bank, Walt said. I am going to call the manager, Deke said, with the patient tone of a man explaining something obvious, who I happen to know personally, who rides a Road King that I rebuilt the primary chain on 2 summers ago when his father was sick, and he could not afford the shop rate, and I told him to pay me when things got better. He pulled out his phone. We do not keep ledgers, but sometimes the things you gave away come back exactly when you need them to. He made the call. 22 minutes later, the branch manager of First Consolidated met them at the side entrance in jeans and a flannel shirt, grumbling and grinning in the specific combination of a man being inconvenienced by something he is privately glad to be part of. 40 minutes after that, Agent Kemp had the originals in a sealed evidence bag, signed and witnessed by 2 federal protocols and 1 county deputy who had by that point switched sides so completely that he was holding the flashlight. They drove back to the garage in Kemp's sedan, Cole in the passenger seat, because she had asked him to walk her through the timeline, and Cole watched her face in the passing streetlights and saw the change come across it on the 4th block. She said, "Say that again," into her phone. Then when? Then who signed off on it? A long pause. Of course they did. She hung up and drove for a full block without speaking. What Cole said, Kemp kept her eyes on the road. Stanton has been building a secondary story for 8 months, she said. He filed a complaint with the state licensing board in March claiming that Walt has been running a stolen parts operation out of the garage, receiving and reselling components from chop shops across 3 counties. He has falsified invoices. He has a paid witness willing to testify. And he has a contact in the DA's office who has been on his payroll for at least 2 years. Her jaw was tight. There is a warrant being drawn up tonight. For Walt. For the garage. Cole felt the cold come into him, the specific cold of understanding something fully and completely and not being able to stop it from being true. That is a lie, he said. Walt has never. I know it is a lie. Kemp's voice was careful and controlled. But a warrant does not require the truth. It requires a filing and a signature from the right person. And the right person in this case is a judge who does business with a DA, who does business with Stanton. The moment Stanton realizes I have the originals, which he will realize tonight when Voss does not check in, his one remaining move is to rush that warrant through before morning. Get Walt into a cell, get the garage tied up in a seizure proceeding, get the story out there as chop shop arrest before any other story exists. Cole was already thinking. A man in a cell cannot defend a garage, he said. And a garage with no owner present, Kemp said, is very easy to condemn and seize and hand to a developer who has the county's interests at heart. She looked at him. He is not trying to win anymore. He is trying to burn it on his way out the door. And Walt is the match he is going to use. How long do we have? If I had to estimate, she checked the clock on the dash. He is making calls right now. The warrant could be signed within the hour. Drive faster, Cole said. He was out of the car before it stopped moving. He found Walt in the bay, and he laid it out the way he laid everything out without hesitation and without softening it, because Walt was not a man who needed things softened, and because there was no time for that anyway. The warrant, the lie, the falsified invoices, the paid witness, the DA, the hour they maybe had. He watched Walt's face through all of it the way you watch a structure you are afraid to see fail. It did not fail. Walt listened to every word standing very still. And when Cole finishes, something settled in the set of Walt's shoulders, a specific release, like a man who has been carrying a particular weight for a long time and has finally recognized it for what it is. Okay, Walt said. Okay, Cole said. Walt, they are going to arrest you tonight for something you did not do. I heard you. And while you are in a cell, they are going to take the garage. Cole. Walt put both hands on the young man's shoulders. Look at me. Cole looked at him. 20 years ago, Walt said they put me in a cell for something I did do. I deserved every day of it. I came out with nothing and nobody. That was the worst thing that ever happened to me. He held Cole's eyes. And you know what came out of it. Deke. The club. This garage. You. He tightened his grip. So let them put me in a cell for something I did not do. Because this time I am not coming out to nothing. I am coming out to 200 people and a federal agent and a kid who built a fortress out of a cardboard box while everybody thought he was sweeping floors. Cole's eyes burned. It is not fair, he said. Fair is not the game, Walt said. Fair is what they tell you to wait for so you never fight. The game is who is still standing when the dust settles. And we have more people standing than they will ever have. They just do not know it yet. Cole was already 3 moves ahead. He had been 3 moves ahead since the first week, since the first piece of paper went into the box, since the moment he understood that his only advantage was thinking past the immediate situation to the situation after that. He did not have size or money or a name that meant anything in this county. What he had was the ability to see the shape of a thing before it fully arrived. He turned to Kemp. If they arrest Walt tonight, he said, even for one night, the headline exists. Biker arrested for chop shop operation. That headline does not go away when the truth comes out. The truth comes out on page 7 3 weeks later. The headline is the story. Stanton wins even if he loses the case. Kemp looked at him. We have to get ahead of it, Cole said. The same play he ran on us this afternoon with the deputy. Get the story out first. Get it out so loud and so clear that when the warrant arrives, it lands in the middle of a national audience watching in real time, and no judge signs a warrant that 1 million people are watching him sign. He looked around the lot, at 200 phones, at 200 people, at the deputy who had changed sides, at Kemp with her sealed evidence bag. He looked at Walt. You let a soaked kid sleep on a cot because it was the right thing to do and you never asked for anything back, Cole said. And tonight, 200 people showed up for you. So let the whole country see who you are before someone else gets to decide. He looked at the truck parked at the edge of the lot. He climbed onto the back of it. 200 conversations went quiet. Not all at once, but in the way sound drains from a space when something claims its attention by degrees and then completely. Cole stood on the truck bed with his bandaged palm and his borrowed work shirt and everything he had built in 2 months, and he held up his phone and he looked at the 200 faces in the lot and beyond them at the road and the dark and the town and whatever was past the town. My name is Cole Mercer, he said, his voice carried in the cold air without him having to raise it. 6 weeks ago, I had $11 and nowhere to sleep. I knocked on 9 doors and 9 people said no. The 10th door was this garage. The man who opened it did not know me and did not owe me anything, and he opened it anyway. And tonight, someone is trying to put him in a cell for a crime that does not exist because he would not sell them what belongs to him. He looked at the phone in his hand and then back at the lot. I have 2 months of proof that the people trying to take this garage have spent the last year threatening and lying and buying the people who are supposed to stop them. I have recordings, I have documents, I have signed statements, and I need your help to make sure the truth is the first thing people see tonight, before the lie gets signed. He hit record. 200 phones came up. The video went up at 6 minutes past 6. By 6:20, it had 40,000 views. By 6:40, it had crossed 300,000, pushed by the riders to every page they ran. The veterans groups, the regional riding clubs, the pages with 100,000 followers each. The networks that existed because of exactly the kind of loyalty that had filled the lot this afternoon. By 7 o'clock, it had passed 1 million. The comments came in a current too fast to follow. People who had been thrown out at 19 and 20 and 17. People who had needed a door to open and remembered exactly what it felt like when one had or had not. People who had watched the last honest thing in their county get sold to someone who could afford to buy it and had never had anywhere to put that anger until tonight. Cole stood at the edge of the lot and watched the number climb and felt the strange relief of having given the thing you most needed to protect to the one place where it could not be buried. Kemp's phone rang at 7:14. She listened. She said yes. She said, I understand. She hung up. She looked at Walt. The warrant died, she said. The lot did not cheer, not yet, because most of them did not know what that meant until she explained it. A judge, Kemp said, does not sign a warrant for a man whose face is on 1 million screens at the moment of signing with a federal agent on the property and a deputy who has already filed an assault report against the men who filed the complaint. The warrant was designed to work in the dark. It does not work in this kind of light. Stanton's contact in the DA's office called the judge 20 minutes ago and told him to sit on it. She looked at Cole. Not because anyone found a conscience tonight, she said, because the math changed. Cole did not say anything. He was looking at Walt, who was standing at the edge of the bay with his arms crossed and his face open in a way that Cole had never seen it, the careful guarded thing Walt wore like a second skin, entirely absent, replaced by something that cost more to show and meant more to see. You did that, Walt said. We did that, Cole said. Walt shook his head. Do not this time. You stood on a truck with a phone and a bandaged hand, and you told the truth to strangers, and the truth held. That was you. Take it. Say it. Cole opened his mouth and closed it. His whole life, one voice had lived in his chest like a tenant who paid rent and damage. You were never worth what they paid me for you. He had carried it so long it had started to feel like his own voice, like a fact about him, rather than a lie about someone else. Say it, Walt said. I did that, Cole said, barely above a whisper. Again, I did that, steadier. The riders nearest him heard it, and they did not know the full weight of what was being said. But they heard what was underneath it, the specific sound of something being rebuilt from the inside. And one of them started to clap, and then the next. And then it was all of them, 200 people, standing in a cold November lot, applauding a 20-year-old kid for saying the truest sentence of his life. Then the headlights came in from the highway. Not a bike, a single car moving slowly, parking at the far edge of the lot. A man got out. He stood beside his car for a moment, and he was alone. Ray Voss looked older than he had that afternoon by a margin that had nothing to do with hours. He stood at the edge of the lot with his hands visible, and Cole watched him from across the crowd and saw the thing in his posture that he had learned to read in people the hard way, the specific weight of a man who has run out of versions of himself that he can keep living inside. Let him through, Cole said. Cole walked out to meet him in the open the lot, watching Kemp drifting closer with her hand near her phone. Voss stopped a few feet away. He did not look like a man delivering anything. He looked like a man arriving. You do not know what he is going to do, Voss said. Stanton, you think this is over because the warrant died. A man looking at federal time with nothing left to protect does not stop. He levels things. Cole waited. I am on your recording, Voss said. My voice, my name, the Stanton logo on my cuff. Your account of the date and location. When this goes to trial, I am the instrument. I am the one who goes down with him. 8 years of his dirty work, and I am the one whose face is on the evidence. He swallowed. Unless I am the one who talks first. Kemp stepped in. Voss looked at her. 8 years, he said. I have the account records from the payments to the DA's office. I moved the money. I have the wire confirmations. The 2 fires, the properties involved, the insurance claims, I know every piece of it. The witness we paid to testify against Walt. I know his name and what we paid him, and I have the bank record of the transfer. I will wear a wire. I will give you everything. He was talking faster now, like a man emptying a room before it catches. I just cannot be the man on a million screens who threatened a kid with nowhere to sleep. My mother called me. She was crying. He stopped. I have a son. He is 9 years old. Someday he is going to watch that video and know what his father did. Nobody in the lot spoke. You understand, Kemp said quietly, that you are confessing to multiple felonies. On this property, in front of 200 witnesses and a federal agent. I have understood for 8 years, Voss said. I just needed to be more scared of staying than of leaving. He looked at Cole. You stood on a truck with nothing and you were braver than I have been in a decade. He held out his wrist. Here I am. Kemp did not cuff him. She handed him a card. You talked to me downtown with your lawyer present, and you put everything you just said on the record with documentation behind it, she said, and I will personally walk your cooperation into the U.S. Attorney's office. It will not make you innocent, but it might be the difference between watching your son grow up and not. That is the only offer I have. Take it or leave it. Voss took the card. He turned to go, and he stopped in front of Cole one last time, and he looked at him the way a person looks at someone they have genuinely and completely misjudged, with the specific bewilderment of realizing the error was so total that it is hard to locate where it began. I am sorry, Voss said, for the SUV, for the threat, for all of it. You did not deserve any of it. He worked his jaw. The night you knocked on that garage, Stanton had a man parked across the road. I read the report the next morning. We almost ran you off before Walt opened the door because I told them to leave you alone. I said you were just a kid with nowhere to go, not worth the attention. His eyes were wet. I have never been so wrong about a person in my life, he said. Then he walked to his car and drove into the dark, and the case against Harold Stanton, 14 months and 3 failed warrant applications, and 100 recanted statements in the building opened like a door that someone had finally found the right key for. The lot stood with that for a moment. Then Deke let out a long, slow breath. Bear, he said, in all the years, I have never seen one evening do what this evening just did. Walt was not listening to Deke. Walt was watching Cole, who had gone very still, who was staring at the place where Voss's car had been with an expression Walt had not seen on him before. He walked over. "Hey," Walt said. "We won. You won." "He had a man parked across the road," Cole said. "The night I knocked. They almost ran me off before you opened the door. Voss said he told them to leave me alone, that I was just a kid not worth the attention." He turned to Walt and his eyes were full. If Voss had made a different call, if their man had moved 30 seconds faster, I would have been gone before you knew I was there. Everything after that, all of this, it would just not have happened. By 30 seconds, Walt looked at him for a moment. Then he pulled the kid in and held on the way. "You hold on to a thing you came close to losing before you knew you had it," and Cole grabbed the back of his jacket and held on in return, and the lot gave them the dignity of looking elsewhere. Deke Callahan stood at the edge of it with his hand pressed flat over his mouth and his eyes entirely too bright for a man of his particular reputation. "But you did make it," Walt said. "You knocked. I opened. And everything after that you built with your own two hands. Voss was wrong. Your stepfather was wrong. The 9 doors were wrong. You were never nothing. There just was not anyone with eyes good enough to see it yet." Cole cried then, fully and without managing it, the way he had not let himself in years, and the night went on around them, warm and improbable, and it was enough. 6 months is enough time to change the shape of a life. Harold Stanton entered a federal guilty plea on a Tuesday morning in April with his lawyer beside him in a courtroom half full of people who had spent months watching his empire disassemble itself with the methodical thoroughness of a financial crimes investigation that now had everything it needed. The plea covered 14 counts. The sentence was 10 years without the possibility of parole for 7. The forfeiture order stripped the shell companies and the subsidiary accounts in the held properties down to nothing. The DA resigned on a Wednesday 11 days before his own indictment arrived. The widow who had been scared off the Harley land received her deed back in March, along with a certified check for damages signed by a federal court. She drove to the garage personally and could not get through a sentence without stopping, and Cole made her tea and sat with her at the workbench until she could. Ray Voss served 18 months at a minimum security facility in Deer Lodge. Cole visited him twice. Nobody understood why until Cole explained it the only way he knew how. "He is the only person who ever said sorry," Cole said. "My stepfather never did. The 9 closed doors never did. Voss drove into a lot full of bikers to say it to my face when he did not have to. A man who can still do that is not all the way gone." Walt did not argue. Walt had been a man people gave up on once. He knew the specific value of not being given up on. The video did not stop. 11 million views by February, and the comments never slowed to nothing, because every day someone found it for the first time on their worst night, and every day Cole read as many as he could, and the ones that frightened him most, the ones from the people who were still outside looking at closed doors, those were the ones he answered. The offers came in the first month in a flood. Jobs in 8 states, a full scholarship from a community college 2 counties over, automotive technology tools and materials, covered by a veterans organization that had watched the video in their chapter meeting and taken a collection. Strangers mailed boxes of parts addressed to the kid with the box, Donovan Ironworks, Missoula, and the post office figured out where that meant every single time. Cole turned down the out-of-state jobs. He took the scholarship and studied nights and weekends for 5 months, and on a Thursday morning in May, he passed his certification exam and became a licensed motorcycle mechanic. He framed the certificate. He hung it on the tool wall in the exact spot where on his second morning, he had taped a found $20 bill with a handwritten note that said of Walt. The certificate covered the same nail. The garage did not just survive. It became in the particular way that certain places become certain things a destination. People drove 2 hours to have their bikes worked on by the kid from the video and the man who had let him in. And they stayed for coffee, and they left having told their own stories, because that is what a place becomes when the people inside it have learned that the thing worth protecting is not property, but the willingness to open the door. Walt hired 2 more mechanics in the spring. He gave Cole the interviews. On a Saturday evening in late May, close to the exact hour of a rainy October night, 8 months before the writers came back. Not for trouble, for the other thing. Deke came in first at the head of 50 bikes, gray beard and all, and the first thing he did was find Cole and hug him so completely that Cole's feet left the gravel, and the second thing he did was announce to the assembled lot that he had been right about being a hugger all along, and he would not be entertaining counter-arguments. The grills came out of the saddlebags. The radio found a station. The lot smelled like charcoal and engine heat and coffee and the specific warm noise of people who are glad to be exactly where they are. Voss came by in the early evening with his son, a quiet 9-year-old who looked at everything with his father's eyes. They stood at the edge of the lot, uncertain, until Cole walked over and pressed a burger into the boy's hands and told him his father had done a brave thing once when it cost him something real to do it. And that was true, and the boy looked up at his father with an expression that was the beginning of something more complicated and more forgiving than what had been there before. It was the best night of Cole's life, and he was standing in the middle of it, not quite believing it was real when Walt climbed onto the back of the truck. Walt was not a speaker. Everyone in the lot knew this. He tapped a wrench against the bottle until the noise settled, and then he stood there for a moment looking at his hands. "I am not a talker," he said. "Everybody here knows that. Cole is the talker. The kid talked a federal warrant out of existence with a phone, so if I keep this short, he will forgive me." A sound moved through the lot. 6 months ago, a soaked kid knocked on my door and asked to sleep in my garage. I said one night. He looked down at Cole standing at the front of the crowd. I lied. I knew it was a lie when I said it. He reached into his vest and pulled out an envelope. "Come up here," he said. His voice was not quite steady. Cole climbed onto the truck. 200 faces turned toward him. Walt held the envelope out. His hand was not quite steady either. "I am not good at this part," he said, quieter now, just to Cole, though the lot was so silent it carried everywhere. "So I am going to give it to you and let you read it. Because if I try to say it out loud in front of all these people, I am going to embarrass us both, and I have a reputation to protect." Cole took the envelope. He opened it. Inside was a deed. Quitclaim deed, transfer of property. The small 2-bedroom house on the parcel behind the garage, the one Cole had walked past 100 times, the one Walt had been quietly repainting and repairing on weekend mornings without explanation. The name on the deed was Cole Allen Mercer. Cole stood on the truck with the deed in both hands and could not speak. "It is a house," Walt said. "It is your house. It has been your house since the paperwork cleared 3 weeks ago. I just could not figure out how to give it to you without making a thing of it, and Deke told me to do it in front of everybody, so I could not change my mind, and I am furious with him for being right." He cleared his throat. "The night you knocked," he said, his voice carrying now because he had decided to let it, "you thought you needed a place to sleep." He looked at Cole. "What you needed was a family." Cole could not speak. He stood on the truck, holding the deed with both hands, and his whole body was shaking. And in his chest, the voice that had lived there for 7 years was saying, "You were never worth what they paid me for you," and the voice was losing ground, was being displaced by something louder and more recent and more permanent, and the displacement was happening right now, in front of 200 people, and he could feel exactly where the old thing was giving way. "You do not have to earn a place to belong," Walt said. "You do not have to keep a box. You do not have to sweep the floor before sunrise. You do not have to be useful enough or quiet enough or grateful enough. You just have to be here. That is all family ever asked of anyone. The world taught you something different, and the world lied. You belonged the second you knocked. I just took 6 months to give you the paperwork." Cole grabbed him, both arms around the old man, the deed crushed between them, and Walt held on with both hands, and they stood like that on the truck bed while the lot erupted around them. Not the careful, polite applause of an audience watching a ceremony, but something rawer and more honest than that, something that came from the specific place in the people where their own closed doors lived. Every rider who had gotten out to nothing, every man who had needed someone to open a door and remembered the weight of the one that finally did, every person who had once been told they were not worth the space they occupied and had spent years trying to prove otherwise. They were not clapping for a house. They were clapping for the door. Deke got onto the truck uninvited because Deke always went where he intended to go, and he held up his hands until the noise settled, and he looked at the two of them and then out at the lot. "I have been riding 40 years, Deke said. I have buried friends. I have stood at a lot of gravesides. I have watched good men get ground down by a world that did not care, and I have made my peace with the fact that it does not always come out right. He put a hand on Walt's shoulder and a hand on Cole's. But once in a while, the universe keeps better books than any of us. Bear gave for 20 years and never wrote it down. This kid kept a box for a man who never asked him to. And the universe, his voice cracked open on the word, paid them both back in full on the same Friday night. He raised a bottle. To the kid who knocked, he said, and the man who opened the door. 200 people raised whatever they were holding. Later, after the grills went cold and the radio found its last song and the riders went one by one into the dark, Cole and Walt sat on the porch of the little house, which smelled like fresh paint and old wood and the particular smell of a place that has just become someone's home for the first time. Cole had the deed in his lap. He kept looking at his name on it. Walt had put the envelope in the kitchen drawer 2 months before the paperwork was finished on a Sunday morning when he was painting the baseboards, and had decided without making a formal decision about it that the house was going to be Cole's. It had been there waiting the whole time, patient as everything else that had been building toward this night. Cole would find it the next morning when he was making coffee for the first time in his own kitchen. Inside the envelope would be the folded newspaper, amber with age, the crease marks white and familiar. And underneath the newspaper, a small piece of paper, handwritten, Walt's compressed and slightly tilted print. I know you found this, the note would say. I waited 6 months for you to ask me about it. You never asked. Thank you for staying anyway. But that was tomorrow. Tonight there was just the porch and the May dark and the two of them. I keep thinking about 30 seconds, Cole said. What Voss said. How close I came to never making it to the door. Walt was quiet for a while. I think about it too, he said. And then I stopped. He looked at Cole, because it was not 30 seconds that made your life. It was every choice you made after you knocked. You could have taken the cot and left in the morning. You did not. You could have kept your head down when the trouble started. You did not. You could have handed the box to Kemp and stayed out of the rest of it. Instead, you climbed onto a truck in front of strangers and said your name out loud. He turned to look at him directly. 30 seconds got you to the door. You built everything else. Do not give 30 seconds the credit for what your own hands made. Cole turned the deed over slowly. You know what is strange, he finally said. My stepfather told me I was never worth what they paid him. 7 years I believed it. And it turns out he was right. Cole smiled, and it was the smile of a person arriving at something they had been traveling toward for a long time without knowing it. I was not worth what they paid him. I was worth more than any of that. He just did not have eyes good enough to see it. Walt reached over and put his hand on the back of Cole's neck, the way old men do when words have run out, but the thing being communicated has not. When the silence itself is the sentence, and both people know exactly what it says. And there they sat, the man the world had given up on, and the boy the world had thrown away, on the porch of a house behind a garage in a town in Montana, in the particular quiet of a May night, when the mountain to the east held its shape against the stars, and the river ran somewhere in the dark, and the last of the engines had faded down the highway. Two people who had each spent a lifetime certain they were unwanted, finally and permanently and undeniably home. The boy who had knocked on a door in the rain had asked for one night of shelter. He had found a father and a family and a life instead. And no one, not a stepfather, not a developer, not 9 closed doors, not the whole cold, indifferent world would ever again be able to tell Cole Mercer that he was nothing. Because 200 people had stood up to say otherwise. And the man who had opened the door had made it law.